So I want to welcome you to week 5. We are finishing up the Between the World and Me, and we're also going to take a look at some verbal phrases as another sort of writing strategy for sentence combining and adding coherence. So after reading over some of your skeletons, and I'm getting ready to respond to those today, I noticed that some of you did have some issues or problems with the idea of Coates' view of the dream. So I wanted to kind of clarify a few points. First, the lie is sort of found in the universal application of the dream, not in the dream itself. So the idea that people want to make their lives better and can do that in America, I think Coates is fine with that. It's the idea that people think that it's available to everyone, where everyone can get a fair shot at a decent life, when I think we kind of agree that that's not true. And then he also argues that white Americans respond to this abuse kind of in this progressively detached way. So they start with half grudging, measures, grudging half measures like, changing some laws and things, quickly followed by denial that it really was that bad or that bad of a problem. And then finally, myth making, the idea, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's even textbooks in the South that kind of talks about, that the Africans were saved from the bad life they had in Africa by coming here as slaves. It's sort of shocking. And then also, and myth making not only just in that sense, but myth making in the sense that, it's any person can make it and would not have these kind of obstacles. And then finally, victim blaming, this idea that if you just work harder, you'll be able to make it. And we see evidence of that in things we've looked at this quarter and things that he also includes, or this semester, and things he also includes in the text. So finally, also, I think one of Coates's points I think is really strong is that the American dream allows whites to pretend that their wealth is a result of just their own actions on a fair playing field. But this just isn't so. It's not just because of their actions on a fair playing field, it's an unfair playing field. And so that's what we need to take a look at. I also wanted to put it into perspective that Between the World and Me is also connected to other writers. And so there's been a lot of parallels drawn between Coates and James Baldwin. And he had some ideas. You see a little bit of his history here. He had some ideas about the American dream that he spoke to as well in the 50s and 60s. Some of his quotes, he was talking about, he says, this idea of fear. It says, this has everything to do with, of course, the nature that the dream, and with that fact that we Americans of whatever color do not examine it, that we don't really look hard at what does the dream include and who really has access to it. And then the second quote he has in one of his famous works, The Fire Next Time, says, "We are controlled here by our confusion far more than we know, and the American dream has therefore become something much more closely resembling a nightmare on the private, domestic, and international levels." And he speaks to this idea that if you set it up as something to, the dream as something to gain, by looking at the reality of our country, that we don't want to actually look at where our wealth comes from, and we're confused by that because we want to enjoy these things, but we also don't know how to acknowledge what's happened. And so and then for those who don't have access, he says it becomes a nightmare. And finally, his last quote, which I put this picture of Neil deGrasse, a black astrophysicist here, because it made me sort of consider this. It says, unless we can establish some kind of dialogue between those people who enjoy the American dream and those other people who have not achieved it, we will be in terrible trouble. So he wants to have that conversation. That's Baldwin. And I think Coates isn't quite there yet, saying that there needs to be a conversation, although I think he would. I think he doesn't believe that really that whites want to have the conversation. And you might also feel that way. You might feel uncomfortable looking at this topic, and might not feel included in it for some other reasons. But I put deGrasse down because he is a black astrophysicist, kind of a celebrity, and he gets often asked, come talk at our Black, Heritage Month, as a scientist. And he said, I'll come to you talk to your group about science any other time except that month. He says, I take that month off because he sort of says that the putting race in with his work has been a problem, and he said it's been difficult for him to get where he's at, and he doesn't even want to kind of talk about the racial question because it's been so hard. He wants to focus on the science itself. He has achieved the American dream, but he said he's given speeches about how many difficulties and how many other people did not make it because of those kinds of inequities. So I wanted to give you some stats, some current stats about African Americans that are connected to the dream. So if we often look at education and employment as the big components to the dream, I just wanted to give you 2 stats that might be helpful. And these are from this book that I have it's a collection called Black Stats, and it is African Americans in by the Numbers in the 21st Century by Monique Morris. So in this book she talks about one of her stats she gives is the unemployment rate for African Americans with a 4-year college degree is 8%, and that's a pretty high rate compared to double that of whites, which is 4.5%. And also African Americans only make up 6% of all STEM occupations. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. And that's compared to 70% of whites, 18% of Asians, and 8% for Latinos. So it gives you some idea that there might not be as much equal access. And this might also connect to this idea of stereotype threat. Do you want to go into a field where you're the only person of color, and how might that dissuade you from pursuing it? Okay, so now we're going to change gears here. We're going to talk a little bit about some grammar issues. We're going to look at verbal phrases. And verbal phrases are important because they're another way to combine ideas and sentences without actually having to add a whole new sentence, and you can just add on part of a phrase to give that description that you're looking for. What is it? It's a verb followed by a group of words. So that verb with the words is considered a verbal phrase. What's different about it is it's not the main verb of the sentence. It's another part of speech, and so and I think you already use them and maybe not even realize it. But there are 3 types. There's a type called infinitive, gerund, and participles. The infinitive is a to plus the verb, so to desire. I have as an example here, to desire the American dream. The gerund form is a verb with the ing on it. I give an example here, arguing for a high standard. And then the participle form is a verb with the ed or en at the end of it. And so you would say discouraged by the verdict. All 3 of these are verbal phrases. Verbal phrases can be used at the beginning, in the middle, or the end of the sentence, as long as they're not the main verb of the sentence. So I'm going to give you some examples here. The first one starts the sentence out. It's a gerund form. Refusing to comfort his son after the Michael Brown verdict, comma, Coates wanted to be honest about his son's future as a black male. So this idea that he doesn't want to comfort his son because he wants to be honest, so that connects the 2. The second one, readers must examine American history to understand the dream from Coates' perspective. Oh, there should be an apostrophe there. I'll add that before I send it out. So you want to, the infinitive form can be put within the sentence. Be careful that whatever comes after the to is a verb. If it just says to the store, that's a preposition, not an infinitive verbal form. And the last one, when whites assume American dream is available to all, they are ignoring the unequal playing field, comma, built by slavery and years of Jim Crow laws. And so that built by slavery, that's at the end, and that's the participle form is past tense. Okay, so if you have more questions about those, let me know. But I would hope in this essay for your final draft, if you could at least get 1 verbal phrase in there and maybe bold it or underline it or highlight it for me, that would be helpful so I can see that you're maybe practicing and trying to use it on your essay. Okay, if you have other questions, let me know. Thanks. Bye.